Revenge is one of the most universally relatable feelings. It's the act of trying to create your own justice in an unjust world, stemming from an evolutionary need for protection through the threat of retaliation. Most of you watching have had thoughts of enacting some form of revenge on an adversarial force. We've all experienced the feeling of being wronged by a perceived malicious party and wanting to even the score. Most of the time, we keep these thoughts of vengeance as just that, thoughts. It's difficult to properly even the score without facing some sort of unforeseen punishment or putting in more time and effort than it's worth while needlessly escalating the conflict. Revenge is a bitter reminder to us that life is a non-zero-sum game. There is no equilibrium to contentment, and some people and organizations will leave this earth having dished out more misery than has been given to them. What is a zero-sum game, however, is baseball. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Every run is charged to a pitcher, every out charged to a hitter. But the forces of humanity don't magically vanish by first pitch. Malice still exists even between the chalk, and the innate desire to exact revenge on those who have wronged others still remains. And if played right, revenge is not met with punishment, but praise. And it doesn't have to be executed through an elaborate scheme, but by just outplaying those you are seeking revenge upon. In the nature of competition, there is victory, and then there's defeat, with a clear distinction between the two. And justice can be found in the just world of sports. Even though people like you and me can only watch from the sidelines, it brings us a sense of levity knowing that those we root and cheer for are able to have a medium in order to properly even the score. So here are some of my favorite revenge games throughout MLB history. Ones that show sportsmanship at its highest and oftentimes
I've lost my respect for the organization, for that coaching staff, for everyone over there.
Lowest. There are phenoms, then there is Bryce Harper. Bryce was on the cover of Sports Illustrated at the age of 16 and was considered by many to be the first truly viral prospect in the age of social media. Naturally, he was drafted first overall by the Washington Nationals in 2010. He quickly rose through their system, and on April 28, 2012, he became just the 38th player since 1980 to make their major league debut before their 20th birthday. Immediately, he made a mark, becoming the second youngest player behind Hall of Famer Al Kaline to receive MVP votes since integration. 3 years later, he became the fourth youngest player to win the MVP at the age of 22 with a monster season most players can only dream of having. His Nationals tenure wasn't always smooth sailing, however. His ultra-fiery personality rubbed many opponents the wrong way, and even at the time manager Matt Williams benched Harper for lack of hustle in 2014. His Nationals failed to advance past the NLDS during his time with them, and even though his postseason numbers were good, there were a few key moments he came up short in. But the fact of the matter was that Bryce Harper was on an upward trajectory, entering free agency as a 26-year-old at the 2018 season's conclusion. During the final weekend of that season, the Nationals had offered Bryce Harper a 10-year contract extension for $300 million, 33% of it being in deferred payments that he would receive until he was 60 years old. Harper, knowing his worth, turned it down. This was the final reported offer the Nationals ever gave to him. After a long and tenuous offseason, the Nationals' division foe, the Philadelphia Phillies, finally stepped up and offered Bryce Harper a contract of $330 million over 13 years, with no opt-outs, the at the time largest contract in MLB history. The Phillies didn't just provide Bryce with life-changing money. They provided him with what the man who spent his youth in and out of national amateur tournaments wanted the most: stability. Nationals fans, however, saw the signing as a personal attack. In the balance of righteousness, it's easy to see the scales tipping in favor of the Nationals faithful. The casual fan isn't staying up to date with the intricacies of contract negotiations. They don't see a man trying to establish and secure his family's future by accepting the best offer presented to him. They see their once beloved franchise icon, one who failed to bring the first World Series title to the nation's capital since World War II, leave for not only their teams, but their city's historical rival. Bryce, however, wanted to keep the peace. On Instagram, he posted a heartfelt message to the fans of DC and vowed to continue donating to the Tacoma Community Center just north of downtown. In the eyes of Nationals fans, however, none of this was enough to quell their need for vengeance. Revenge can act a lot like a war of attrition, both sides not understanding when enough is enough. As Nationals fans would soon find out, sometimes it's better to call it before you're on the wrong side of a lopsided defeat. As fate would have it, Bryce Harper's first game in Phillies gray would come in the last stadium he called home. He tried everything in his power to make this as smooth a separation as possible, but Nationals fans did everything in their power to send him one message: that he was a traitor. Even the mayor of Washington, D.C. tweeted a picture depicting him as famed American traitor Benedict Arnold. The boos rained down as soon as he went in the on-deck circle, and they only grew more intense once his name was announced on the PA. The boos quickly turned into cheers when Harper's former teammate Max Scherzer struck him out on a changeup just below the knees. They wanted him to feel the betrayal that his departure brought them. In return, Bryce showed them why you don't escalate a situation to a height you are unable to reach.
Breaking ball slammed to right. It's in there for a base hit. Segura wheels around second. Harper wants a double. Segura stops at third, and after 2 strikeouts, Harper solves Scherzer because here's Harper. And now a second hit of the night for Harper. Here comes Segura to the plate. It's 6-0, and Harper takes second. Think he's amped?
He is. And this Philly offense has a chance to do this on a nightly basis, going elsewhere.
In the air to deep right field. This one is gone. Wow. 2 strikeouts, then a single, a double, and a home run right into his cheering section.
In the span of 4 innings, we saw his ability to hit in the clutch, his enthusiasm, but most importantly, the loyalty to his new fan base. He didn't need to bring out the theatrics. In fact, he probably wasn't planning on it. But the fans who ruthlessly showered him in boos without understanding his side got a taste of what not only they were missing out on, but were to be the long-standing recipients of. However, Nationals fans would end up getting the last laugh when their team brought home a World Series championship to DC 6 months later, something as of this writing, Bryce Harper has yet to do in a Phillies uniform. Phillies fans watching, how would you rate that last game? Would the optimism for your team's future and seeing your $330 million man obliterate his former team lead to a high rating? Nationals fans, how would you rate it? Would seeing your former wonderkin take an axe to your team lead to a lower rating? Or would you give it a decent one as a tip of the cap to him? Do any of you watching actually remember your initial thoughts and feelings on the game? Unfortunately, that time has passed, but thanks to RateGame, today's sponsor, you can start your own digital sports watching journal. RateGame allows you to rate every game you watch, whether it be NFL, college football, the Premier League, MLB, and in 2 weeks they're launching the NHL, and see what others are watching and how they're rating. The ultimate vision of RateGame is to be the universal source of truth for the best and worst sports games of all time. In order to do that, we need dedicated sports fans like you to download the app and make your opinions heard. Think of this like Letterboxd, but for sports. And with this being the first Major League postseason with RateGame at your disposal, you have a unique opportunity to make a profound impact over the discourse of the best sports games of all time. Maybe one day they remake Good Will Hunting, and Pete Davidson, playing the therapist, waxes poetic about Austin Wells hitting the shortest walk-off homer in World Series history. And you can sit back and say, I was there. That was my first perfect rating. The power is in your hands, so download RateGame today and rate to remember so you never forget. Links in the description.
When you give your heart to somebody and then they, rip it back out of it, out of you, they just, it was a lie. It was false. It was false. It was a false love affair.
Getting revenge on a former team's fan base is one thing. Bryce Harper most likely wasn't deliberating on the satisfaction he'd get from a proper revenge game. Ultimately, he got what he wanted, and didn't intend to leave on bad terms. His desire for revenge was a spur-of-the-moment reaction to the hostile treatment he experienced upon his return to Washington. His focus was also diluted to an indistinguishable blob of a fan base. There wasn't a face he could pinpoint his desire for revenge on. So what happens when there are faces you can put in your crosshairs? Tom Seaver was the Mets. He was so synonymous with the franchise that he was literally nicknamed the franchise. He won 3 Cy Young Awards in a 6-season span that saw him lead the Miracle Mets to a surprise 1969 World Series title in only their 7th year of existence. His only defect? He knew his worth. Tom Seaver signed an extension with the Mets right before the 1976 collective bargaining agreement, which created a boom of free agent contracts with ever-increasing payouts. Seaver was beguiled by the shift in not only player payout, but in the new approach to roster construction, as teams could sign unrestricted free agents at will. However, there was one large market team that did not adopt this approach: his New York Mets. Seaver publicly lambasted his team during the winter of 1977 for not making an effort to improve themselves. This rift created a very public and very nasty feud between Seaver and Mets board chairman M. Donald Grant. This conflict was exacerbated by Daily News columnist Dick Young, who sided with Grant, referring to Tom Seaver as a troublemaker and insubordinate. After a back and forth, Seaver and the Mets were on the verge of making amends when Dick Young dropped a masterclass in yellow journalism. Bringing his family into the skirmish was the final straw, and Seaver wanted out. On June 15, 1977, after a close win against the Braves in Atlanta, the Mets announced that Tom Seaver had been traded to the Cincinnati Reds in exchange for pitcher Pat Zachary, infielder Doug Flynn, and outfielders Steve Henderson and Dan Norman. This trade would be referred to as the Midnight Massacre. Tom Seaver, who at one point believed he would retire a Met, was being shipped westward. His first meeting with the press upon learning about the trade is possibly the most candid and raw of interviews you will ever see from an athlete at the time.
Ovation I got the other night.
His team and the legacy associated with it was stripped away by a slimy Wall Street broker and his de facto mouthpiece. Tom Seaver had no choice but to accept his fate and move on, but his calendar would be marked for August of that year, for it was his return to Shea Stadium for the first time as the opposition. On August 21, 1977, he would personally make sure Grant and Young couldn't move on.
It'll be Kuzman against Seaver in what should be an emotion-packed ball game before a big house at Shea this afternoon. That's strike 3 call on the outside corner. 2 strikeouts for Seaver. Henderson did not like Jim Quick's call. In the inning, no runs, no hits, and nobody left on at the end of 1. And he is struck out swinging Greenpool. 1 down. He struck him out swinging with a high fastball. And he struck him out swinging with a breaking ball down and away. No, he made the catch in foul ground. Big, retiring 11 consecutive hitters today. There's strike 3 call. Boy, he got Grandel looking. And Lenny now openly beating with Jim Quick. Second time Seaver has struck him out, and that's number 9. It'll bring up the strike. On to Hodges. Strike 3 call, and this one belongs to the Reds. Another brilliant pitching effort by Tom Seaver as he limits the New York Mets to 6 hits in a 5-1 victory. His 14th win of the year, and we'll be back in just a moment.
This was only tied for the 72nd best start of his career, according to GameScore. But to Tom, this was everything he could have hoped for. The sight of a man who has meant so much to your team, giving you a taste of your own medicine, must have been quite the shock for New York's fan base. Tom wasn't doing this against them, however. He understood they shared the same devastation he felt when he was ran out of town. It's why they gave him a standing ovation before he even threw a pitch that day. This was a concerted effort against 2 men who spearheaded the charge. While Tom Seaver's Reds would fall short of several World Series titles, fate would deal a cruel hand to M. Donald Grant, as he himself was ran out of the Mets organization a year later. He directly attributed the mutiny as a result of the Seaver trade. While Dick Young would be given the J.G. Taylor Career Excellence Award by the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1978, his name was met with a chorus of boos. Sometimes your legacy can be cemented by being the victim of revenge, but what if it was built on being the exactor of it? That's the case of Brandon Phillips and the Atlanta Braves.
When the drum beats go like
Brandon Phillips was a fixture of Seaver's Reds at second base for 10 seasons, making 3 All-Star teams, winning 3 Gold Gloves, and even picking up MVP votes in 2007 and 2012. He had already established himself somewhat of getting his just desserts against the fellow Ohio team that deserted him. Even the franchise that initially drafted Phillips had to change their location and identity just to be spared from his wrath, even though they would eventually get theirs from Bryce Harper years later. The Reds were ready to move on from Phillips in the final year of his contract at the end of the 2016 season. However, Phillips blocked several trade attempts, as were his 10-5 rights, including to his hometown Atlanta Braves. Phillips claimed he blocked the trade on the matter of principle, attributing unspecified issues that needed to be resolved. Eventually, he and the Reds came to peace, as they agreed to terms with the Braves. Phillips, in the twilight of his career, carried his need for revenge, torching his former team over an August series that fell a day short for the 40th anniversary of terrific Tom's revenge game for the very same team. While Phillips was playing well for the Braves, they, just like the Reds, wanted to move on. Prospect Ozzie Albies was promoted to take over at second. Brandon, by all accounts a respected veteran, was not shy about his disappointment. Father Time was ever creeping, and now 2 teams were ready to move past him. Even though he tried to make a switch to third, the mark was made, and the Braves put Phillips on waivers in September of 2017. Even though it stems from an evolutionary purpose, revenge can come as a response to an existential threat. Everyone feels the need to prove to those who have doubted us. Even though we are bound by the limitations of our bodies and mind, sometimes an injection of adrenaline brought by those who consistently point out those limitations is what we need to temporarily ascend past them. Bryce Harper and Tom Seaver were driven by scorn and admonition. Phillips was driven by a need to punish those who felt his playing days were in the rearview. On June 27, 2018, after waiting over almost 10 months for a contract, the Red Sox, in need of depth at second base, signed Phillips to a minor league deal. He made his team debut on September 5th against who else? The upstart Braves themselves were trying to prove that they belonged as a contender after years of being in the cellar. Their aspirations were being quickly dashed by dropping 2 games at home against the Red Sox. A true contender. In the top of the 9th of Game 3, the Braves were holding on to a slim lead against them. Even though it was against their B team, this was a sign of life that they could hold their own against the big dogs. Brandon Phillips, however, had another say.
Pitch. Swinging a long drive to left. Way back. Can you believe this? Brandon Phillips has homered. The Red Sox lead it 9-8. Can you believe it? 0, you're my hero. Number 0, playing in his hometown against his old team. The first game in a Red Sox uniform, and Brandon Phillips has driven in 2, scored 3. He waves to his family in the crowd.
At the time, Brandon Phillips was 13th in homers for a second baseman, the final one being an act of revenge towards a team that tried to tell him his career at that position was over. He would wind up making 3 more career starts there. He only got 2 more hits over his final 8 career games, but in typical Brandon Phillips fashion, it was the final stop on his revenge tour. Those 2018 Red Sox were a team built on revenge. In fact, it's the reason they signed Brandon Phillips in the first place. So far, we've seen individuals go against organizations and their fan bases. But what happens when an organization seeks revenge upon an individual? On April 21st, 2017, Orioles star Manny Machado spiked Red Sox legend Dustin Pedroia in the knee, trying to disrupt a potential double play. This was a post-Chase Utley slide world, and whether intentional or not, this was viewed as a dirty play by a contingent of Red Sox players. Dustin Pedroia, who was already dealing with knee issues, had to leave the game. The Red Sox were pissed, and in the unofficial rulebook for a team that is angry at a hitter, they knew what tool was at their disposal.
And he gets drilled.
Tempers flared, objections were thrown. Pedroia himself made a peace offering by telling Machado that the attempt on his life was not Dustin's bidding. A little more than a week later, Red Sox ace Chris Sale attempted his own bidding.
He's 3 for 9 on 7. Chris Sale, there's the warning from the home plate umpire. It was bound to happen, but boy, I didn't think it was going to be that fast.
That's stuff that you don't do. Throwing that at my head, you're throwing that everywhere. Bullshit. You know, I've lost my respect for the organization, for that coaching staff, for everyone over there.
Red Sox pitchers, like the rest of us, came to realize throwing at a hitter in order to retaliate is a fool's errand. It's childish and is no way to settle the score. You run the risk of disproportionate punishment and creating a scenario where neither side believes they got out of it on top. Plus, it's not like they were the ones getting out on top anyway.
Machado leads things off the 7th inning against Chris Sale. There's a drive, high and deep, left center. Delivery got a hold of that one way back in left field. The question is how far. Manny's answer, good for 2 down. High fly ball, he really leaned on that one. She's gone totally out of the ballpark for a 3-run shot. Of all people.
Dustin Pedroia would have knee surgery after the 2017 season and would only play 3 games during the entirety of 2018. It had seemed his career had come to an end, and the Red Sox had not forgotten who accelerated his demise. It seemed like Machado would be spared from any other punishment when he was traded to the National League in mid-July. But revenge has a way of bringing opposing forces together at the most opportune time. Machado's dirty playstyle was suddenly propped up on a national scale during the Dodgers' postseason run, and while the world was just learning of it, the Red Sox were all too familiar. Their sights were set on one thing. Well, actually, they're trying to win the World Series, but suppressing Machado's bat and embarrassing him on the world's largest stage was also on the list. And suppress his bat they did. Machado would have the worst playoff series of his young career, causing himself to be viewed as a pariah by the Los Angeles media. But the cherry on top came in his final at-bat. The same man who had attempted revenge more than a year ago had the chance to bury his target and cement his place in every 2018 World Series DVD for years to come.
Pitch.
It's only fitting that Sale would throw a pitch that brought Machado to his knees the same way he brought Pedroia down to his. This story reminds me of the tale of the 47 Ronin, a group of samurai whose master was brought to his premature end at the hands of an overzealous court official. The group of Ronin, or masterless samurai, plotted their revenge over the course of a year and forced their target to suffer the same fate he caused their master. It's a story that shows that revenge can be shared amongst multiple individuals, and that shared force can be powerful enough to bring down the perpetrator, or even conquer the world. This wasn't the only time prior injury led to the need for revenge in 2018. Psychologists have pointed out that the only satisfaction there is to be gained from it is when the victim understands why revenge has been sought out in the first place.
Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
In the game of revenge, reaction both starts and ends the cycle. In this story, the first reaction occurred on September 11th, 2014.
Oh my gosh.
Marlins star Giancarlo Stanton was hit flush in his left cheek by a Mike Fiers fastball, resulting in facial lacerations, fractures, and missing teeth. All of this required extensive facial reconstruction surgery. This pitch ended what could and probably would have been his first MVP award. Afterwards, Stanton made it a point to forgive Mike Fiers. He understood that some pitches just get away. These two would not face again until 2018, with Stanton now a member of the New York Yankees and Fiers with the Detroit Tigers. Their first game was uneventful, as Stanton went hitless in 3 at-bats against the righty. But in his second at-bat of their second matchup, Giancarlo stared down the same sight that almost ended his career 4 years earlier.
Pitch. Look at it's Stanton, and Stanton gives a little look, and now has something to say to Mike Fiers.
Stanton was reasonably pissed.
Wasn't trying to hit me in that situation, but still, with the history like it, what happened, don't hit me.
He already stared death in the face once, and now the harbinger was coming for him again. Mike Fiers learned nothing. This is now war.
And his reaction had a lot to do with who it was, and he's going to like that. And he is going to make sure and stylize that drop. A bomb off the bat of Giancarlo Stanton.
Fiers was angry about the point he received from Giancarlo after he rounded the bases.
Getting his revenge and, throwing his bat and pointing, that's not part of this game. Yeah, you're supposed to have fun, but I think that's kind of childish. But
this was only Stanton executing his right as someone who seeks revenge to make the victim understand why it was sought in the first place. Mike Fiers created the first reaction, and Stanton, the final reaction. About a year and a half later, Mike Fiers would become the whistleblower for the Astros sign-stealing scandal when he spoke to reporters Ken Rosenthal and Evan Drellick corroborating their story. Many wondered why Fiers waited 2 years to blow the lid. Others speculated it was his own act of revenge for when the Astros released him after their World Series win and subsequent drubbings they handed him during the 2019 season. There is a part of me that hopes Fiers felt less satisfaction than Stanton felt against him. Revenge is only truly worth it if the receiving party knows why they're being taught a lesson. Otherwise, it just creates more damage for both sides. Giancarlo Stanton was hardly the first Yankee who brought over their vengeance from another team. Mark Teixeira, despite having the 4th most homers in a player's first 6 seasons, was an under-the-radar slugger for the Texas Rangers, Atlanta Braves, and Los Angeles Angels. That was until he was paid a ton of money by the New York Yankees. While with the Rangers, Tex was teammates with starting pitcher Vicente Padilla, who had a bit of a reputation as a headhunter.
The runner goes. Swisher charges the mound.
He hit 98 batters from 2002 to 2009, the most in Major League Baseball. The next closest to him was Tim Wakefield, who, it should be noted, was a knuckleballer, which meant he had very little control of where his pitches went. Vicente, who sported a decent walk rate, knew exactly where he wanted his pitches to go. As an American League pitcher, though, he was spared from any retaliation. Instead, it was the Rangers' best hitters who had to face the blowback of Padilla's aggression. This meant that Mark Teixeira and teammate Michael Young had to suffer as a result. Look, I'm just going to say this. Vicente Padilla was a bad dude. He is every prototypical sports villain, minus actually being that good at their sport. He was apparently a bully in the clubhouse, and Mark Teixeira made it no secret that he was disgusted by Padilla's behavior. So the first time he faced him as a Yankee, he did the only thing he would ever be remembered for.
And again, Teixeira gets hit. Teixeira's ticked off.
The first one was iffy. This ball right here, that's just a fly. You know what the intent was.
One of my favorite moments in film or TV was the Southern Raiders episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender. In it, Katara confronts Yon-Ra, the man who took the life of her mother, someone who has mercilessly ruined the lives of many to the point where he lost count. When she first sees him, she is a powerless child unable to find recourse. When she last sees him, she is arguably one of the best waterbenders in the world. She finds out that he is nothing but a pathetic coward, willing to do or say anything, even sacrifice his own mother to have his life spared. Katara neither puts him out of his misery nor forgives him. I see a lot of Vicente Padilla in Yon-Ra and a lot of Mark Teixeira in Katara. On July 6, 2012, Vicente Padilla, now a reliever with the Red Sox, is brought in to silence a potential Yankees comeback. His first opponent, none other than Mark Teixeira, with vengeance in his eyes. After a 6-pitch at-bat, Teixeira finally unloads on Padilla's 7th straight fastball for what ultimately became the game-winning triple. This merely whet Teixeira's appetite for revenge, however, the first act in a full-length installment. After the game, Teixeira made his disdain for Vicente Padilla no secret. Padilla's response escalated the conflict to a height he wouldn't be able to reach even if he had a ladder. Not only did he call Teixeira a coward, not only did he throw belittling and misogynistic comments at him, He accused him of being a racist, which by all accounts are totally unfounded claims. These, in Teixeira's words, erroneous comments that could only be made by a coward himself, only added fuel to his fire. Vicente Padilla is once again entrusted to hold down the Red Sox lead. If anyone gets on, he will have to face Mart Teixeira. Everyone in the stadium can feel the impending at-bat.
If anybody gets on, Teixeira and Padilla have plenty of history.
The Yankees just need a base runner, and a base runner they shall receive. Padilla is able to strike the next two hitters out, but at this point, his fate was pretty much sealed.
Yes, he got him. Tie game.
Even though the Red Sox would eventually win this game, Mart Teixeira broke Vicente Padilla. The 34-year-old seemed to have found a new life as a late-inning reliever. This is what his ERA looked like before Teixeira's swing. This is what it looked like after. Padilla would promptly retire after the season. This is the type of revenge that was years in the making. The normally even-keeled Teixeira had pent up his rage and finally let it out with one swing of the bat. While Katara neither killed nor forgave Yon Ra, Tex neither spared nor forgave Padilla for his several injustices. A scourge was finally taken down, and it was for the world to point and laugh at his demise. So far, we've seen revenge as a method to one-up a former team, a final act, and as a counterpunch to someone who's physically hurt the perpetrator. But we haven't seen an act of revenge encapsulate all three. Derrek Lee, like Mart Teixeira, was perhaps the most underrated player in the 2000s. He only made 2 All-Star teams, despite the fact that he had the 8th best OPS plus for anyone with as many plate appearances as him that decade. He always seemed to be in a string of bad circumstances, from getting traded by an accidental World Series winner to the team he helped eliminate to suffering a wrist injury coming off an MVP top 3 finish and contract extension with said team, the Chicago Cubs. Those same Cubs unceremoniously traded Lee to the Braves during the 2010 season in an attempt to jumpstart their next chapter after failing to win their own World Series with him. From there, Lee would take a trip up I-95 to Baltimore before heading west on I-70 to Pittsburgh. By this point, Lee was in the twilight of his career. However, just like Brandon Phillips, he found a spark against his former team, hitting 2 homers against them on August 1st. However, 2 days later, Lee would be hit directly on the wrist by his former teammate, Carlos Marmol, one of the few Cubs spared from their great teardown. The ball fractured Lee's wrist, and even though he tried to play through it, he was placed on the DL on August 13th, possibly ending his career. Less than a month later, Lee was back in his old stomping grounds. After getting an RBI single in the first, he would come up in a crucial spot, top of the 9th, down 2 runs, their last out, and the bases are loaded. More importantly, the pitcher was none other than Carlos Marmol, the same man who nearly ended his career a month earlier. Rain is pouring down in Wrigleyville. The game would probably have been called if it weren't already the 9th inning. Rain is often the backdrop to a good revenge scene, as it symbolizes, you know what, fuck it, just play the clip.
And a fly ball hit deep to left field. Johnson is back. Derrek Lee has just hit a grand slam to give the Bucks the lead in the 9th inning. Can you believe this guy? My goodness. He just hit a grand slam on Carlos Marmol, 2 outs in the 9th, and the Pirates now lead 7-5.
Lee would end up rekindling his prime for the final month of his career. I like to believe he was living off of borrowed time and found the final gear needed for him to end his career on his terms after experiencing the very real possibility of it being out of his control. Revenge is both a motivator and a deterrent. It's the key principle that has kept us from jumpstarting the apocalypse in the nuclear age. Is it an effective deterrent through the medium of baseball, though? I actually don't know. Nationals fans continued to boo the opposition, Mets ownership continued to throw beloved players under the bus. and guys from Mike Fiers to Vicente Padilla continued to hit batters. Most contemporary mediums will tell you outright that revenge is a bad thing, a vicious cycle in which both sides continually escalate the stakes and degrade themselves in order to feel whole. I don't necessarily subscribe to that belief. Most of these associate revenge with violent retaliation, but as we've seen, the best forms of revenge are much more nuanced. Now, in our day-to-day lives, we can't just challenge an adversary to a competition in order to regain our just satisfaction. But we can get our revenge through motivating ourselves to lead the better life. It may not be as instantly gratifying as seeing our opponent experience congruent harm. But as the saying goes, success is the best revenge.